Hi, this is Charles Langley, Executive Director of Public Watchdogs. Today is June 24, 2020. Earlier this year, Public Watchdogs filed a 2.206 petition to revoke Southern California Edison's ability to bury nuclear waste with the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This isn't just any waste. It's deadly for 250,000 years and is being stored on the beach 108 feet from the water at San Onofre in thin-walled stainless steel containers that are only guaranteed to last between 10 and 25 years by the manufacturer. The canisters are designed much like an 18-foot-high soup can. They have one weld on the side and a welded top and bottom. The walls of these welded shut canisters are only 5/8 of an inch thick. These cans are so radioactive that getting within a few feet of one for just a few minutes would probably kill you within a few hours. What's more, each can contains more cesium-137 than was released during the entire Chernobyl disaster. The nuclear waste inside the canisters can reach thousands of degrees if the cans are not constantly cooled by air being passively circulated around them. The cans are stored in steel-reinforced concrete silos located about 3 feet above the water table in a tsunami inundation zone on top of an earthquake fault line with 8.5 million people living within a 50-mile radius. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, has evaluated this situation and says it's safe. But earlier this year, Public Watchdogs filed a 2.206 petition with the Commission alleging that the canisters are vulnerable to flooding and that in the event of a flood, the cold water hitting the sizzling hot sides of these cans would flash to steam, causing safety problems for the public. Today, we defended our petition to the NRC, which to date has refused to analyze what we assert is a dangerous and unanalyzed condition. During this presentation, you may hear terms that are new to you. One of them is ISFSI, or Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. This is the NRC's Orwellian term for a beachfront nuclear waste dump. Another term you will hear is VVM, or Vertical Ventilated Module. A VVM is just a fancy term for a cylindrical hole in the ground about 20 feet deep with a steel lining to hold the canisters that are filled with nuclear waste. With that introduction, I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, hearing no one, I would like to, Charles, if you could introduce yourself and anyone who's representing Public Watchdogs.
Yes, this is Charles Langley. I'm the Executive Director of Public Watchdogs, and I'm here today to present with our subject matter expert and engineer, Paul Blanche.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Is there anyone else, any other members of the public who would like to introduce themselves? If you could unmute yourselves one at a time and introduce yourself.
Donna Gilmore, San Onofre Safety.
Carlin Green, UXC.
Okay, thank you for that. So the agenda for today's meeting, after this introduction, we'll have...
Chris?
Yes.
Chris, hi, this is Al Bates. I'm with Southern California Edison. I'm the regulatory manager at San Onofre, the licensee. And with me today I have Mark Morgan, who's a senior nuclear regulatory affairs engineer, as well as Derek Bryce, who is our chief legal counsel for SUNS decommissioning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I left off Perry. Did you introduce yourself, or did I mention you before?
You did mention me before. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Didn't want to leave you out. All right. So any other introductions before we move on? Okay, hearing none. As I mentioned, the agenda is for today's meeting is to provide the petitioner an opportunity to provide new information to the PRB for the PRB to consider in its review of the petition that's been submitted. It was agreed that an hour would be provided to the petitioner for this presentation. After that presentation, we'll enter a brief question and answer phase where either the licensee may ask the PRB questions related to the issues raised in the petition, or the petitioner and the licensee may ask the PRB questions related to the 2206 petition process in general. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the PRB Chair, Kevin Williams, for some opening remarks.
Okay, I just want to verify that you can hear me.
Loud and clear here.
Okay, good, thanks. So welcome to this meeting regarding the 2.206 petition submitted by Public Watchdogs. I'd like to first share some background on our process. Section 2.206 of Title 10 of the Code of Federal Regulations describes the petition process, the primary mechanism for the public to request enforcement action by the NRC in a public process. This process permits anyone to petition NRC to take enforcement-type action related to NRC licensees or licensed activity. Depending on the results of its evaluation, NRC could modify, suspend, or revoke an NRC-issued license or take any other appropriate enforcement action. The NRC staff guidance for the disposition of 2.206 petition request is Management Directive 8.11, which is publicly available. The purpose of today's meeting is to give Public Watchdogs an opportunity to provide any relevant additional explanation and support for the petition after having received the PRB's initial assessment. This meeting is not a hearing, nor it is an opportunity for Public Watchdogs or other members of the public to question or examine the PRB on the merits of the issues presented in the petition request. No decisions regarding the merits of this petition will be made at this meeting. Following the meeting, the PRB will conduct its internal deliberations. The outcome of this internal meeting will be provided to Public Watchdogs in a letter. The PRB typically consists of a chairman, usually a manager at the senior executive service level at the NRC. It has a petition manager and a PRB coordinator. Other members of the board are determined by the NRC staff based on the content of the information in the petition request. The members have already introduced themselves. As described in our process, the NRC staff may ask clarifying questions in order to better understand Public Watchdog's presentation and to reach a reasoned decision on whether or not to accept Public Watchdog's request for review under the 2.206 process. I would like to summarize the scope of the petition under consideration and the NRC activities to date. On February 5th, 2020, Public Watchdogs submitted a petition to the NRC under 2.206 regarding concerns about decommissioning activities at SONG. The petition requested that the NRC order Southern California Edison to 1, immediately halt decommissioning activities at SONGs, 2, report to the NRC that SONG's ISFSI is operating in an unanalyzed condition, take immediate action to preclude flooding of the SONG's ISFSI, and 3, suspend all fuel transfer actions from the spent fuel pools to the ISFSI at SONGs, among other requests. On April 20th, 2020, the petition manager contacted Public Watchdogs to inform them of the PRB's initial assessment that the petition does not meet Management Directive 8.11, Section 3.C.1 criteria for petition evaluation because NRC staff has continued to carefully regulate the licensee's decommissioning activities at songs, including through its review of the fuel storage facility design, inspections encompassing the physical facility as well as the licensee's operation performance, and appropriate enforcement action. The primary safety concern stated in the petition was the unanalyzed risk and imminent threat or the effects of inundation of the song's ISFSI with flood water or burial by debris that would result in rupture of multiple casts due to thermal shock, with the results of leaving the public at large vulnerable to a radioactive release and permanent dislocation from their residences and livelihood. The effects of the inundation of the song's ISFSI with floodwater or burial by debris, and specifically the impact of such conditions on the spent fuel canisters, have been evaluated and addressed in the final safety analysis report for Holtec High Storm UMAX dry cask storage system, and that is found at Adams ML number 18192B as in Bravo 094. The NRC staff reviewed the UPSAR for the UMAX system and found that the system meets all applicable NRC regulations. The petition manager offered Public Watchdogs the opportunity to address the PRB to clarify or supplement the petition in response to this assessment, and Public Watchdogs requested to address the PRB in this forum. As a reminder for all participants, please identify yourself if you make any remarks, as this will help us in the preparation of the meeting transcript that will be made publicly available. Thank you. Public Watchdogs, I will now turn over the meeting to you to provide additional information for PRB considerations as part of the petition. Right at this moment, we've allotted 60 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Williams and Chris Bajwa. This is Charles Langley of Public Watchdogs. Mr. Bajwa, are you able to, it looks like you're loading our presentation right now. While that's going, I'd like to talk about something that I think is kind of pertinent and germane to what we're going to be talking about today, and that is that yesterday a 7.4 Richter scale earthquake hit the west coast of Mexico in a town called Oaxaca. The earthquake triggered a tsunami alert for the Pacific coastlines for Central America. Now, tsunamis, which could easily flood the Independent Spent Fuel Installation, or ISFSI, at San Onofre, are caused by blind thrust earthquake faults. Songs is located fewer than 2 miles away from something called the Oceanside Blind Thrust. This earthquake fault has been extensively documented by more than 30 peer-reviewed geological studies. A few years ago, Southern California Edison commissioned a $12 million study to quote-unquote prove that there is no blind thrust fault system off the coast of San Onofre, and that it would be impossible for an earthquake to exceed the structural limits of the Song's ISFSI. Yesterday's tsunami merits special attention because at 7.4 on the Richter scale, it could have easily caused serious damage to the Song's ISFSI if it had occurred off the coast of California. Now to get back to the presentation, just to introduce myself, again, I'm Charles Langley, and in terms of my background, I have 24 years of experience as a public advocate regulating California IOUs, or investor-owned utilities. I got my start in this field in 1996 as a public advocate for UCAN, the Utility Consumers Action Network, and then in 2016, I founded Public Watchdogs, a 501c3 public benefit charity to protect electricity ratepayers from the California Public Utilities Commission and to represent Californians before regulatory bodies such as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Next slide, please. What we're here to talk about today is what we believe is an unanalyzed flood condition. The San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, SONGS, has a history of flooding. Today we intend to prove that this history represents an unanalyzed or underanalyzed condition that must be addressed by the NRC immediately. Next slide. Next slide, please. Good. Severe floods from rain. The site has a history of flooding. Previous slide, please. According to the NRC Event Report dated January 22, 2010, even the high ground on the Mesa has been subject to severe flooding, according to Event Report number 45634. According to this report, on January 18, 2010, the access road to the SONGS Mesa facility was flooded by rain blocking vehicle access to the San Onofre Emergency Operations Facility. According to the report, in the event of an emergency at San Onofre, Southern California Edison would have had to direct emergency responders to travel to the alternate emergency operations facility located 30 miles away in Irvine. 2 days later, on January 20th, the access road to the SONGS Mesa was again flooded. Again, San Onofre Emergency Operations was inaccessible to vehicles, and emergency responders were directed to travel the 30 miles to Irvine. Next slide, please. This is a tsunami inundation map. It shows southern Orange County and northern San Diego County. And that line down the middle of the map is the border between the two counties. We could go to the next slide, please. San Onofre is located near that border. Now that little notch in there is a close-up of where San Onofre is located. Now, this is a tsunami inundation map from the California Geological Information Services. And it shows that this little notch in here, this divot, is where the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, ISFSI, is located, including the domes and all the outbuildings. Most of the facility is located within this tsunami inundation zone, meaning, of course, that if there was a tsunami, this facility and the ISFSI, the spent nuclear fuel dump, would be inundated. Next slide, please. One thing I'd like to talk about is the vocabulary that's been used in some of Edison's rebuttals to concerns that we've expressed about songs. Next slide, please. Next slide. In its rebuttal, Edison countered Public Watchdog's concerns by stating, quote, the outside shell, that's the outside shell, of the warmest spent fuel storage canister on site is approximately 225 degrees Fahrenheit, not an average of 452 degrees Fahrenheit. So we looked everywhere to find what was being defined as the outside shell. And nowhere in any of the Holtec documents relevant to the MPC 37, which is the brand of canister used at Holtec, is there a reference to an outside shell. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so what we're looking at is a cutaway of a Holtec multi-purpose canister, and this isn't the canister that's used at San Onofre. It's an MPC 100, I believe, inside a concrete overpack, and it's the only reference, if you look at this red circle, where we could find reference to an outer shell or an outside shell. We therefore advise the NRC to carefully examine any claims that Edison is making regarding the temperature of various components of the MPC 37, because it appears that between Holtec and Edison, the definitions of the different parts and components of these vertical ventilation modules, canisters, vault systems, whatever you want to call them, are kind of slippery and flexible. So we'd just like to state that when they specify what a temperature is, you need to be very specific in determining what part of the system they're talking about, because right now we're not very clear on that. Next slide, please. We'd also like to point out what we believe is a faulty assumption. In its public response, Southern California Edison said, quote, "The water would enter the inlets of the vertical ventilated module lids and flow down the annular region between the cavity enclosure container and the divider shell." In other words, they're saying that the canister inside the silo that holds them would be filled up with water. Now, what's interesting is that Edison has actually argued that flooding these things with water will actually improve the cooling capacity of the canisters. Let me say that again. Edison has argued that flooding the canisters will actually improve the cooling capacity of the canisters. And this is what they say, quote, "It would be more akin to heating a pot of water for spaghetti. Plus, the temperature of the canister surface would begin cooling immediately, since water is a better conductor of heat than air." Now, we respectfully submit that this is a false assumption. And the reason is that tsunamis rarely consist of pure, sparkling ocean water. A more likely scenario is tons of semi-liquid mud, rock, and biological debris completely blocking the convection cooling function of the canisters. In fact, it's entirely likely that this ISFSI could be covered under many, many feet of mud and rock. In fact, as Mr. Blanche will explain later, convection cooling could also be hampered by other factors. Next slide, please. Now, this is my last slide. And I'd just like to observe that the NRC has a history of ignoring flood risks at nuclear reactors. And I know that this is a new Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but I'd just like to observe that in 2012, an NRC employee named Richard Perkins with NRC's Division of Risk Analysis wrote to the Office of Inspector General that the NRC was intentionally classifying, in other words, keeping secret, flooding analyses at U.S. nuclear reactor sites by claiming that these analyses were, quote, sensitive security information in an effort to conceal the information from the public, unquote. In the case of songs, similar flood information is being withheld on the grounds that disclosure threatens the intellectual property of Holtec International, the vendor of the system used at songs. Now, when public safety is at stake, the public's right to know the facts must not be subordinated to the protection of corporate profits. 106 years ago, Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis wrote that the people have a right to know how the people's business is being conducted. Sunlight, he said, is the best disinfectant, and electric light the most efficient policeman. For years, San Onofre has provided us with reliable electric light, but now the people have a right to know how the public's money, more than $4 billion of it, is being spent on nuclear cleanup. I thank the Petition Review Board for listening to my arguments today, and I now turn you over to our engineer, Paul Blanche, for the remainder of this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, this is Paul Blanche. I want to thank you, Charles. Thank you, Chris. I just want to clarify one thing that Charles said to make sure we're all on the same page, and that is that I don't disagree with Edison that if the VVM is totally covered with water, there will be proper heat removal. As long as there is no obstruction and it's totally covered and remains covered up to 125 feet of water, I don't have a problem as far as cooling goes, but that won't occur. Again, I want to thank the members of the Petition Review Board for listening to me, and I have additional information, new information that I've come upon that I deem to be very, very significant. I'm on slide 1, which is just the title slide, and now I'd like to go to slide 2. We've all the NRC PRB members have introduced themselves, and I have 2 questions. It was mentioned at the beginning that there is a member from the Senior Executive Service. Could you please identify who that member is?
Kevin Williams.
Kevin Williams is SES?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any professional engineers on from the NRC?
Yes, this is Chris
Okay.
Bajwa. I am a professional engineer registered in the state of Maryland.
Okay. And how about reactor operator authorizations, license, power operator? Okay. All right. My professional background is I am a professional engineer. I am an authorized reactor power operator from the United States Navy. I have a degree in electrical engineering. I've worked in the nuclear industry for well over 50 years on regulatory and safety issues, and I think I'm well respected by most of the people within the NRC. All of my following slides are in accordance with Management Directive 8.11. I'm following the guidance there. And just to confirm that we're all on common ground, again on slide 2, I mentioned the documents that I'm using as a reference, which is UMAX Revision 5 and New Reg 1536, which is a standard review plan. And I'm also referencing now, it might not be on your slide, NCFR 72.128, parenthesis small a, parenthesis 4 and 5. And what this says, you must demonstrate that you have a heat removal capability having testability and reliability consistent with its importance to safety. Certainly, cooling heat removal of 100 to 150,000 BTUs per hour is important to safety, and if we lose that capability, we will have major problems. Next slide, please. Okay, if we get flooding through whatever means, and whether it's permanent or long-term flooding or short-term flooding, we have a disaster on our hands. When water enters above the vents at San Onofre, each of the 72 vertical ventilator modules that store the nuclear waste will be flooded to above the outlet vents. Once this flooding occurs, there is no known means discussed in the final safety analysis report, NRC documents, or Holtec documents to recover from this event and restore cooling. Once the flood waters recede below the inlet vents, we have lost all cooling on all VBM modules. Next slide, please. This is a reiteration what was in the original 2.206, that flooding is a design basis event. This is supported by the standard review plan by the 10 CFR 72. And then I want to say that if flooding occurs, damage to the vertical ventilator modules may be unrecoverable in the short term and possibly in the long term. And I show a picture of the area, and this is a photograph supplied by Edison, which shows the area that will be flooded in the event of a tsunami and a tropical storm, and there might be possibly other events. Next slide, please. And now there's new information that I have. Flooding, of course, is a design basis event. That's just a repetition of what I've said before. Water from the tsunami or storm will be above the UMAX inlet and outlet vents. Once the water recedes from the event, most water will flash to steam and be expelled. This phenomena may be repetitive with waves and surges. We don't know how long it lasts and how frequently it occurs. However, once the water recedes, subcooled water will remain in the BVM, blocking all cooling, and I'll get into a little more detail as to why I believe that is the case. When the water remains in the bottom of the BVM, all passive cooling flow will terminate in every one of the units, or a common mode failure. The MPC structural integrity has not been analyzed due to rapid cooling, rapid heat up. Next slide, please. I'm on slide number 6. The fuel and BVM temperatures and pressures are not analyzed beyond 32 hours from the reference document. It's assumed in the document 32 hours, somehow it magically ends. The recovery from this event, flooding event, is briefly discussed and includes removal of the MPC, multi-purpose canister, from the BVM, and to remove obstructions by washing and vacuuming if required. Again, this has to be done 72 or 73 times. And the other thing that's not discussed in any of the reference documents are the radiation levels that exist around these modules when they're removed, when they're cleaning, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Flooding considerations from New Reg 1536, which is what the NRC is supposed to use when they're reviewing the applicant's final safety analysis report. And it says, and we can all read it together, the SAR should establish a design basis flood condition. I think we already have that. It's somewhere above the outlet vents. If the SAR establishes parameters for a design basis flood, all of the potential of flood water byproducts should be recognized. What they mean there is debris and salt and water and so on and so forth. Serious flood can involve effects such as blockage of the vent ports by water and silting of air passages. Other potential effects include scouring below the foundations and severe temperature gradients resulting from rapid cooling from immersion. Next slide, please. So we go to the FSAR and we look for the analysis of what happens with a flood. And I took a picture of the page. I forget exactly what page it is, but it's from the applicable FSAR, and it says section 4.6.2.5 flood. And it says proprietary information withheld in accordance with 10 CFR 2.390. And we added text has been redacted for some reason by NRC Holtec. This is what Charles referred to is you cannot hide information that impacts the public from view by the public. If there is something that is truly proprietary, we can arrange for handling of that if it needs redaction. We can handle that. We need a complete flood analysis. Next slide, please. This is from Oregon State. It says, if not controlled, the extremely rapid cool down rates to which the hot MPC and internals and fuel cladding could be subjected to during reflooding of the MPC cavity could result in uncontrolled thermal stresses and failure of structural members. Again, another issue that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. Now, this is a Holtec slide, and I can't identify it exactly where it came from, except that I know it's a Holtec slide, and it looks reasonably accurate, projecting the axial temperature of the Holtec multi-purpose canister. And if we follow the red line, we can see that it goes up almost 370 degrees centigrade, up 4 meters, or up 4 meters from the bottom of the canister. But the interesting part is if we look at the temperatures down 1 meter and below for the red line, or for any of the lines, we can see that the temperature is in the vicinity. This is the wall temperature of the Holtec. It's a low temperature. It's somewhere around 100 to 150 degrees F, 50 degrees C. So we can see that subcooled water could exist up until it reaches 212 degrees, which might be over a meter from the bottom of the BVM. And this is important as far as blockage of flow. Next slide, please. This I've annotated the data from the FSAR that shows a typical cast installation maximum temperature after 32 hours of flow blockage. And I got these numbers from the following slide, which is slide number 12. But going back to this, it shows some pretty significant temperatures here. Fuel cladding of 964 degrees, fuel basket 936 degrees. Those are beyond the limits, but again, I want everyone to remember, this is only after 32 hours. This could persist, most likely, for more than 32 days or 32 weeks. We don't know the consequences. The water has not been demonstrated to be able to be removed. It could be tested, but for some reason it hasn't been tested. Next slide, which is slide number 12. The temperatures I annotated on a previous slide were taken from this table 4.6.7. Next slide. Okay, the maximum temperatures reached after 32 hours of complete duct blockage. Again, this is a direct quote. Short-term operations include but are not limited to the MPC drying and on-site transport. The 1058 degrees F temperature limit applies to MPCs containing all moderate burn-up fuel. So this last sentence is important, and maybe Donna, not now, but Donna might take an interest in this. The limit for MPCs containing one or more high burn-up fuel assemblies is 752 degrees F. We've already seen that 32 hours of blockage brings it up to 964 degrees F. So we've got another problem, that the temperatures with a flood will certainly exceed the design temperatures for a high burn-up fuel. The summary, issues, conclusions, and questions. These are pretty much statements. flooding of the ISFSI has not been analyzed, at least an analysis that we have seen as a member of the public. Flood analysis, if existing, has been withheld on that redacted page. Flooding above the vents will halt all coolings for all VVMs. This is a serious problem. This is a problem I just recently recognized. Steam, initially, when the tsunami or flood recedes, will be produced and will be expelled as steam until the water reaches the saturated conditions for whatever temperature the MPC is at. Subcooled seawater will block all cooling with no possible recovery. Flow blockage has only been analyzed for 32 hours. Next slide. Structural impact of multiple rapid temperature changes has not been analyzed. Impact of residual salts and other contaminants and flood byproducts not analyzed. Common mode failure has not been considered or discussed. Radiological impact has not been addressed. And then new Reg 1536 says all of the potential effects of flood water and ravine flood byproducts should be recognized, not done. There are no emergency plans that I've seen which are discussed in the FSAR for the recovery of the 72 or 73 flooded vertical modules. And in conclusion, I want to thank the Petition Review Board for listening to me and my perspective pertaining to this major safety issue and request the NRC bring the ISFSI into regulatory compliance. That means a capability to withstand and recover from a flood, which is a design basis event. And again, I want to thank you for listening to me. I'm turning it back to you, Chris.
Well, Ms. Watchdogs, thank you for taking the time to provide the NRC staff with clarifying information on the petition you've submitted. As stated at the opening, we will now enter the question and answer phase of the meeting. At this time, does the PRB have any questions for the petition? Hearing none, if present, does the licensee have any questions for the PRB related to the issues raised in the petition?
This is Al Bates, Southern California Edison. We do not have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Al. Does the petitioner or licensee have any questions about the 2.206 petition process?
Well,
I apologize.
Speaking for the petitioner, this is Paul. I would like to know why the flood analysis has been redacted and withheld.
So that's a question that's outside of the scope of this process. So the question that we're having is, do you have any questions about the 2.206 petition process?
I don't. Charles, do you?
Yeah, this is Charles Langley. Thank you for going through this process, Mr. Williams, and I'm wondering if you can tell me what happens next and what is the expected time frame for a response from the NRC?
So what happens next is we'll review the additional information that you provided. We will also review the transcript from this recorded meeting. We being the PRB, will re-engage and discuss the additional information and make a determination of whether there's any new information that would warrant a change to our current assessment in terms of what Chris shared with you in terms of where our initial assessment came out. And if there is a change, we will address that in our write-up. If there's not a change, then we will convey to Public Watchdogs the outcome of the petition.
Yeah, this is Paul Blanche. I'd like to just make one comment. I think most of you have seen the recent Inspector General's report. I think it was 16-024. And I believe one of their findings was to encourage more of a dialogue between the petitioners and the PRB. And I'd like to reinforce this. I've been through a number of 2.206 petitions, and it always seems it's a monologue and very rarely a dialogue where we can openly share information and questions between us. And I encourage the PRB to establish a formal dialogue with themselves and Public Watchdogs and myself to assure that we're all looking at the same problem.
Yes, that is duly noted. I appreciate your comment. Are there any other questions about the 2.206 petition process from Public Watchdog?
Yes, this is Nina Babiars. I do have a question.
Okay.
Considering that we don't know what is in the report that's been suppressed and withheld from the public, and considering the fact that the seismic and tsunami activity has continued up to yesterday, would part of this process be that the NRC, in addition to responding to the 2.206, would consider updating that flooding report to a current status? Thank you.
Chris or Rob, do you want to address that at all? Rob Carpenter, are you on?
Kevin, this is Rob. I'm sorry, I'm here. I was having trouble getting my phone off of mute. So let me ask for you to repeat the last part of that question once again, just so I make sure I understand.
Yes, considering that we do not know the contents of the report that has been suppressed from the public's review, and in addition to the response to Public Watchdogs 2.206, would part of that consideration be the NRC hopefully updating, considering that the seismic and tsunami activity as recent as yesterday, would you consider updating the report, and as a part of updating that report, release it to the public?
So I'll address that in two ways. The first is that the seismic and tsunami activity you're referring to is what Mr. Langley was talking about in Mexico? Is that
well,
what
it's
you're...
a constant threat on the West Coast, including the tsunami inundation zone smack in the middle of the San Onofre site.
Okay, so it sounds to me like the question is generally given the possibility of seismic and tsunami activity, would we update the analysis?
Well, the probability, probability, since we live with it on a 24/7 basis out here, the probability.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the answer to that question is not. That is not something that would be a part of the 2.206 process. The 2.206
No, my
process.
question was, in addition to the 2.206 response to public watchdogs, and considering that we don't know what was in the report in the first place that's been suppressed, but knowing from this presentation that there is a constant and upgraded seismic and tsunami threat that, of course, either or both would result in flooding, would the NRC consider updating that flooding report to a current status of the current seismic activity threatening this site, and then release that updated report to the public?
I'm of the opinion that that question is not about the 2.206 process at all, actually.
Well, I guess my question is actually related to the 2.6. From this exercise of 2.206, does the NRC consider upgrading the information to a current status to reflect the threat?
So this is Kevin. I think I wanted to, I allowed this to go forth because what I really wanted to do was get to the crux of your question. And I think what we need to try to do is package this more in terms of public watchdogs providing additional information in that regard. And I believe that was the intent of mentioning it in the beginning. And so as we go back and look at the transcript and look at the additional information that was provided, it's something that we'll consider as we're considering the petition.
Okay, this is Paul Blanche. I have another comment. We know the regulation requires the ability to cool the fuel after a flood. And it also requires demonstration and testability and reliability consistent with its importance to safety. As an engineer, this is very testable. One could test an actual module to see if cooling is in fact blocked. And if they can, Southern Cal, Holtec, or whomever, NRC, can conduct an actual test replicating the impact of a flood and demonstrate that cooling is still adequate, then they should do that. If not, we're all guessing. And it's very easy to flood one of those BBM canisters to see what's going to happen. The NRC says nothing's going to happen, so there's no danger of damage. So I think that the NRC, the licensee, and Holtec should consider an actual test to see whether flooding will block cooling, as I contend. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any members of the public, before I conclude the meeting, do you have any comments regarding the 2.206 petition process? With that, this meeting is concluded, and we will be terminating the phone connection. Thank you for your time, and thank you for providing additional information.